May 1954. The remote valley of Bien, far from the world's eyes, was about to witness one of the greatest upsets in modern military history. This is the story of how the Viet Minh defied an entrenched colonial power, built just an incredible logistical marvel in the jungle, and brought a conventional fortress to its knees. We are diving deep into this decisive moment in the First Indochina War. We want to understand not just that the French lost, but really how General von Giap managed to undo decades of colonial doctrine using, well, ingenuity and relentless siege warfare.
It's a truly spectacular turning point, and, to really grasp it, you have to appreciate the situation the French High Command was in back in 1953. A bit desperate, really.
Desperate how?
Well, they've been fighting for years, losing men, spending huge amounts of money. And the premier back in Paris, René Mayer, he basically gave his commander, Henri Navarre, an order: create the military conditions for an honorable political solution. That's the phrase they used.
An honorable exit, basically. They needed a win.
Exactly. They needed a knockout battle to force the Viet Minh to the negotiating table on French terms.
And that need, that pressure for a decisive fight, that led straight to this Harrison idea, right? The hedgehog concept.
That's right, formulated by Colonel Louis Berthail. The plan was audacious, you have to admit. Establish a massive fortified airhead, a base supplied entirely by air deep in enemy territory.
The goal being to cut off Viet Minh supply lines running into Laos.
Yes, and critically, to force Giap, the Viet Minh commander, to commit his main forces to a big set-piece battle, a conventional fight.
And the French assumption was?
Yeah.
That they'd win that easily?
Pretty much. They believed their superior armor, their air support, heavy artillery, it would just, tear apart any Viet Minh forces attacking across the open ground of the valley. They thought it would be like shooting fish in a barrel.
They'd had some success with a similar idea before, hadn't they? At Nha San.
They had, and that success arguably blinded them. It reinforced this belief that they could dictate the terms of the battle.
It seems incredible, though. If Giap had already shown he wouldn't fight that kind of battle unless he had a massive advantage, why did French intelligence seem to just ignore that?
Well, it seems like a mix of arrogance, maybe some wishful thinking, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the terrain. At Nha San, the French held the high ground. That was key.
But not at Bien.
No. Giap famously compared the valley to a rice bowl. His troops held the rim, the edge, the high ground. The French were down in the bottom, vulnerable.
Okay, so the analogy works perfectly.
It does. The Viet Minh controlled the commanding heights. They outnumbered the French garrison, eventually about 4-1 in combat troops. And crucially, they possessed capabilities the French completely underestimated or just dismissed.
So the trap, the hedgehog, it wasn't really set for the Viet Minh at all.
In the end, no. It became a trap the French set for themselves based on flawed intelligence and overconfidence.
Okay, let's move to the actual fortress. Operation Castor begins November 20, 1953. How big are we talking here?
Eventually, the French committed nearly 16,000 men. You had elite paratroopers, foreign legionnaires, North African and Indochinese colonial troops. A real mix.
They built this base from scratch, essentially.
Absolutely. They established the main central position, surrounded by 7 key satellite strongpoints. They gave them women's names, Béatrice, Gabrielle, Claudine, Eliane. And the isolated southern position, Isabelle.
And I read they even flew in tanks. That seems ambitious.
It was. 10 U.S. M24 Chaffee light tanks. They had to fly them in, broken down into, I think, 180 individual parts each, and then reassemble them right there in the valley.
Wow. That's a massive logistical undertaking just for the tanks.
It shows the commitment. They were building a serious Western-style fortress, expecting a conventional defense.
But while the French were busy flying in tank parts, Giap was doing something very different.
Completely different. He initially had a plan for a quick attack, fast strike, fast victory, but then he reassessed. He looked at the French positions, looked at his own preparations.
And changed his mind.
He did. He canceled the quick assault, a decision he later called the hardest of his entire career, and shifted to a meticulous long-term siege strategy. Steady fight, steady advance. Months of preparation.
And this is where the Viet Minh logistics just become, well, legendary almost. Moving heavy artillery through that terrain.
It's astounding, truly. We're talking about moving maybe 50,000 regular troops into position around the valley, plus the 351st Heavy Division.
Heavy Division means?
It means serious firepower. 105 millimeter howitzers, 37-millimeter anti-aircraft guns, heavy mortars, stuff supplied mainly by China. They ended up outnumbering the French artillery about 4-1.
Okay, 4-1 is a huge advantage, but how did they get it there and hide it?
That's the genius of it. It took immense human labor, tens of thousands of porters, civilians, basically hauling these massive guns piece by piece sometimes over incredibly difficult jungle trails, up steep slopes, often at night under constant threat of French air attack.
Just pure manpower and determination.
Pure manpower, incredible engineering on the fly, and absolute secrecy. Then, instead of massing the guns in traditional batteries, they dug them in individually.
Individually?
Yes. Single guns, placed in carefully camouflaged, shell-proof dugouts carved deep into the reverse slopes of the mountains overlooking the valley.
So they weren't just hidden, they were protected from French counterfire.
Exactly. And the tactic they used was brilliant and devastating. They employed direct fire.
Direct fire. With artillery.
Yes. Normally, artillery sits back and lobs shells indirectly. Here, they would often wheel the cannon onto a prepared terrace just outside the dugout, fire point blank, almost like a sniper rifle, directly at a French bunker or position through a small opening, like a porthole.
Wow.
And then immediately pull the gun back under deep cover.
So the French gunners couldn't spot the muzzle flash effectively, couldn't target them.
Precisely. French counter-battery fire was largely ineffective. They often couldn't see where the shots were coming from. It completely negated the French advantage in artillery observation and sophisticated fire control.
And the psychological impact of that. Knowing you're being hit accurately, but you can't hit back effectively.
It must have been terrifying. It shredded the confidence of the French artillery right from the start. They had no real idea how many guns Dieppe had or where they all were.
So the stage is set. The hidden guns are in place. The siege begins March 13th, 1954. What happens first?
It starts with a massive, sudden, incredibly accurate artillery bombardment. The main target is the northeastern outpost, Béatrice, held by the 3rd Battalion of the 13th Foreign Legion Demi Brigade.
And the impact is immediate.
Devastatingly so. Within hours, the French command structure starts to crumble. The battalion commander at Béatrice and his entire staff are killed by a direct hit on their bunker. Shortly after, the commander of the central subsector is also killed by shell fire.
Command decapitated almost instantly.
Almost. And Béatrice itself, despite fierce resistance, is overrun by Viet Minh infantry that same night. Then, just a day later, Gabrielle, held by an elite Algerian battalion, falls after its command post is knocked out by another concentrated barrage.
2 major strong points gone in just over 24 hours. That must have sent shockwaves through the garrison.
Absolute shock. And then comes perhaps the most dramatic signal of how badly things were going for the French.
You're talking about the artillery commander.
Colonel Charles Piroth. He had famously boasted before the battle that the Viet Minh artillery wouldn't be able to fire more than a few rounds before his guns silenced them.
And he couldn't do it.
He couldn't. He was apparently completely distraught, overwhelmed by his failure to locate and destroy those hidden Viet Minh batteries. Just 2 days after the siege began, on March 15th, he committed suicide in his dugout with a grenade.
My God. That speaks volumes about the pressure and the failure of the core French strategy.
It was a total disaster for morale, though they tried to keep it quiet, but the feeling of doom started to spread.
And it had practical consequences, too.
Yes. On March 17th, the defenders of Outpost Anne-Marie, who were mainly Thai auxiliaries, local ethnic minority troops loyal to the French, well, they were demoralized by the fall of Béatrice and Gabrielle and subjected to intense Viet Minh propaganda. Many of them just melted away, deserted, or defected.
So the perimeter is already shrinking, and what about the lifeline, the airstrip?
Critically, the Viet Minh artillery rendered the main airstrip permanently unusable by March 14th, just 1 day after the siege began.
1 day, so from that point on.
From that point on, the entire fortress, 16,000 men, depended entirely on parachute drops for every single bullet, bandage, and ration, and those drops became increasingly difficult and dangerous.
Okay, so after that initial brutal opening, there's a bit of a pause, right? From mid-March to the end of the month.
Yes, a relative lull in major assaults. But the Viet Minh weren't idle. Dieppe used this time to consolidate his gains and, crucially, to fully implement his siege tactics.
This is where the trench warfare really begins.
Absolutely. They started digging. An incredible network of trenches and tunnels, creeping steadily forward towards the main French positions, completely encircling the central complex and effectively isolating the southern outpost, Isabel. This is classic siegecraft, the process called sapping.
Sapping. So they're digging towards the enemy undercover.
Exactly. Building trenches that protect them from fire, getting closer and closer, day by day, night by night, slowly strangling the fortress, tightening the noose.
And then the fighting flares up again, end of March.
March 30th. A new wave of massed Viet Minh assaults, this time hitting the strong points on the eastern side, primarily Eliane and Dominique. The fighting there was incredibly fierce, just brutal attrition.
And the French were desperate. I read they started using their own artillery in unconventional ways.
They had to. At one point, when Viet Minh troops overran parts of Dominique, the French gunners from the 4th Colonial Artillery Regiment did something extraordinary. They lowered their 105mm howitzers to 0 elevation.
0 elevation, firing them flat.
Essentially, yes. Turning these big artillery pieces into giant direct fire cannons, almost like massive machine guns, firing horizontally right into the attacking Viet Minh ranks at point-blank range.
The effect must have been horrific.
Devastating losses for the Viet Minh in those specific assaults. It shows the desperation on the French side, but also the sheer intensity of the attacks they were facing.
But even with tactics like that, the overall momentum was still with the Viet Minh, wasn't it?
It was. The cost for GIOP's forces was immense, though. We know from intercepted communications and later accounts that some Viet Minh units suffered staggering casualties. There were reports of units faltering, even refusing orders to advance into the meat grinder.
So how did Giap keep the pressure on? Maintain discipline with such high losses?
That's a key question. It really speaks to the extreme level of organization, dedication, but also political control within the Viet Minh army. They had political commissars attached to units.
Their job being
to maintain morale, enforce discipline, ensure unwavering commitment to Giap's steady fight, steady advance plan. Units that hesitated faced immense pressure, coercion even, to push forward. Giap understood the strategic goal was worth the horrific cost as long as he could maintain that forward momentum. And he did.
Meanwhile, the French logistical situation is just getting worse and worse.
Completely collapsing by April. The supply planes had to fly higher and higher to avoid the increasingly effective Viet Minh anti-aircraft fire. This made the parachute drops less accurate.
And the drop zone itself is shrinking.
Day by day, as the Viet Minh trenches crept closer, supplies were lost, falling into enemy hands. Ammunition ran low, medical supplies were critical, food was rationed. The garrison was being slowly starved and choked.
It sounds like the end was becoming inevitable.
It was building towards a climax. The Viet Minh launched what they called their final general offensive on May 1st. They threw everything they had at the remaining strong points.
And there was a specific turning point on May 6th.
Yes, a couple of things. They used Katyusha rockets, truck-mounted multiple rocket launchers for the first time in the battle, adding to the psychological shock and bombardment.
But the big one was the mine.
The mine under Eliane, too. Viet Minh sappers had managed to dig a tunnel right underneath this key position on the eastern side and packed it with explosives. They detonated it on the evening of May 6th.
Creating a massive breach.
Exactly. It blew a huge hole in the defenses, stunned the defenders, and Viet Minh troops poured through the gap. Eliane, too, collapsed quickly after that. That was really the beginning of the end.
So May 7th is the final day.
May 7th, Giap orders the all-out final assault on the remaining central positions. The fighting is desperate, hand-to-hand in places.
And the French commander, Decisive, knows it's over.
He does. He radios French headquarters in Hanoi that afternoon. The Viets are everywhere. The situation is very grave. I feel the end is approaching, but we will fight to the finish.
And the final message.
The last radio transmission from the command bunker around 5:30 p.m. reported simply, "The enemy has overrun us. We are blowing up everything. Vive la France." Then silence.
Wow. The scale of the surrender must have been unprecedented for the French in Indochina.
It was staggering. 11,721 French Union troops were captured. This was the largest number of prisoners the Viet Minh had ever taken in a single battle.
And their fate was grim.
Incredibly grim. They were forced on a brutal long march to prison camps hundreds of kilometers away. Conditions were terrible: disease, malnutrition, exhaustion. Only about 3,300 of those captured at Dien Bien Phu were eventually repatriated months or years later.
So a death rate in captivity of around 60%.
That's the estimate, yes. It was horrific. Of course, Viet Minh casualties were also immense. Their official figures were around 4,000 killed and 9,000 wounded, but the true cost might have been higher.
We should also touch on the American involvement here, even
Right.
if it was indirect.
Absolutely. It's important context. By this point, the U.S. was footing the bill for about 80% of the French war effort in Indochina. They were heavily invested financially.
But no direct U.S. military intervention.
No, President Eisenhower ultimately rejected proposals for direct intervention, like airstrikes. But the U.S. did provide significant material aid, the tanks, aircraft, and there was a covert element.
The pilots?
Right. 39 American civilian pilots, contract pilots working for Civil Air Transport, which was effectively owned by the CIA, flew incredibly dangerous supply missions into Bien Phu. They flew 682 sorties under heavy fire.
And some didn't make it back.
2 American pilots, James McGovern Jr., known as Earthquake Magoon, and Wallace Buford, were killed in action during the siege, shot down while trying to drop supplies.
So the immediate aftermath, the fall of the fortress, has huge political consequences.
Instantaneous and global. The French government in Paris collapsed, resigned shortly after the surrender. And the timing was critical. The Geneva Conference, which was intended to settle various issues, including Korea and Indochina, was already underway.
So the fall of Dien happened just as they were discussing Vietnam's future.
Exactly. It completely shifted the diplomatic landscape. It strengthened the Viet Minh position enormously and weakened France's. It led directly to the Geneva Accords, which partitioned Vietnam temporarily at the 17th parallel.
And the psychological impact beyond France.
Profound. It was a massive blow to French prestige and colonial power worldwide. Anti-colonial movements everywhere saw it as proof that a technologically inferior but determined and well-led indigenous force could defeat a major European power.
I heard the Algerian National Liberation Front called it the Valmy of the colonized peoples.
They did, referencing the key French Revolutionary battle. It became this incredibly powerful symbol, the idea that European military supremacy wasn't invincible, that ingenuity, logistics, popular will, and understanding the terrain could overcome conventional firepower.
It really makes you reconsider so much about military strategy. You look back at that battle, the sheer mastery of logistics, concealment, siege warfare, completely choking off an air-supplied base.
It's a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you mentioned the numbers earlier. The French got only about 4,000 tons of supplies, dropped in over 167 days. Compare that to the later American siege at Khe Sanh in Vietnam,
where the U.S. dropped something like 18,000 tons in just 77 days using massive air power. And even Khe Sanh was a near-run thing.
So thinking about today, what does this incredible victory built on hidden logistics, clever engineering, and just relentless willpower against superior conventional tech? What does Dien Bien Phu teach modern military planners, logisticians, engineers? What are the lasting lessons about mastering the ground you fight on and the truly devastating cost of being cut off?